The sun did, in fact, come up in Columbus, Ohio. I think if Zach Boren is like me, we probably waited all Saturday night just to confirm that fact and also trying to figure out what exactly happened for Ohio State. They lost 30-24 in the game 3 years in a row. They've come up short in the rivalry. He's Zach Boren. I'm Austin Ward. Am I right? Were you like me, staying up all night trying to think about what the heck happened in the big house?
Yeah, just like you and I think a lot of other Buckeye fans, I kept on thinking I was in a nightmare. Literally, I thought I was going to wake up and it was going to be Saturday morning again. And I'm like, okay, what happened? Like that was all just a really, really big nightmare. And yeah, man, it's tough. This is a tough one. I didn't sleep well last night. I'm sure you didn't sleep well last night. I'm sitting there in my hotel bed, and it was almost like after you play, and you start thinking about plays going through your head and literally how they played out and what could have been different. And I'm sure the players, I'm sure Ryan Day, I'm sure this entire coaching staff is doing the same thing last night and even into today.
Yeah. So this version of the Sunday Blitz, not the one that we necessarily had in mind, but when you were thinking about that, Zach, and trying to come up with the answer, where did it begin with you? What was the most important thing that you kept coming back to for coming up short again?
The biggest thing that keeps on coming back to me is just the mentality of the team. It's not Ryan, it's the players that are playing the game. And I think, from talking to former players, from being at the game, from seeing it in person now 3 years in a row, because I was up in Ann Arbor 2 years ago as well. Mm-hmm. There needs to be a mindset going into this game that's different than any other game, right? You can play 11 weeks in a season, and it doesn't matter who you play. You can roll out and say, hey, listen, we're Ohio State, and we know we're the best, and we're going to win this football game. You can do that easily and go 11-0. In the team up north game, you have to roll out there. It's not we're Ohio State, because guess what? Across the field, they're saying we're Michigan, and we're going to beat your ass. And so these players that have that mindset, and I don't want to call it entitlement. It's, I'd say more, it's just a lack of that dog mentality. Like I wasn't at that game, and I didn't have a belief that the players wanted to get into an all-out fist fight every single second of that game. I didn't get the feeling that those dudes made a play and would get up and let those team up north guys know, hey, listen, this is who I am, and I'm going to be here all day long. Like there was dog in this team to say, hey, listen, this is our mentality. We're here for a 60-minute all-out back alley fight, and we're literally going to do everything and scrape and fight and claw just to win this game. And I think that's what's missing. It's they're just waiting for someone to make a play, and then it'd be like, okay, we're Ohio State, we won the football game, right? Like those games or those plays don't just come in the greatest rivalry in all of sports. You have to will those plays to happen. You have to fight every single inch in that game for those plays to happen. And that's the one thing I think we're missing. You get late in that game, and there were so many things we could talk about throughout the game. But you even think about 8:05 left on the clock. Ohio State scores a touchdown and go 27-24. All you have to do is get off the field, make a play. Literally, you should have seen, the dudes in the middle of that defense looking around. You should have seen the defensive lineman foaming from the mouth like a freaking just dog wanting to get after J.J. McCarthy. Like literally, they should have been tasting blood, and they were just like waiting to get off the field. That's what they were doing. They weren't making the play to get off the field. They were waiting to get off the field. And that's where my head kept on going. And I think that's the one thing that needs to change, obviously, moving forward, if you want to be successful in this football game.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's got to be one of the most frustrating parts of the game in hindsight, Zach, is that we've seen clear market improvement over the course of the year from Jim Knowles and that Ohio State defense. But the second half felt exactly like the previous 2 years. And there was no sign stealing. There was no cheating. There was no Connor Stallions. Jim Harbaugh wasn't on the sideline. There was none of that. Michigan lined up with 8 minutes to go and ran the football for 7 minutes and kicked a field goal. From Ohio State's front seven, that's not what we've come to expect over the course of the year, but it is what we've seen from the previous two editions of this game. And you have to just look at that and say, why? Like, how does that part keep happening? Because I didn't feel like in this game in particular that Ohio State was more talented, and I didn't feel like toughness was in question. They had a really impressive third quarter drive where Travion and Chip ran it right down Michigan's throats as well. There were plays primarily in the first half where Ohio State was bottling up the run, and like Blake Corum was fighting to get 2 and 3 yards of carry. Like, they were capable of doing it. And then there's just, I know that Michigan is also a good team, and that good teams, it was a one possession game, like, and it was on the road. Like, okay, that's fine. Sometimes you lose, sometimes you come up short, but a lot of these things are the same issues that we talked about 3 years in a row, and there's not a built-in excuse now for cheating and all the other stuff that was going on. That was just lining up and not being able to stop the rush, when all week long last week we said whoever runs the ball and stops the run is going to win the game.
You hit the nail on the head, right? It's you can't have any excuses this year. But to your point, did this Ohio State football team look much tougher than the last 2 years? Yes. Did they were they physically in the football game the entire game this year compared to the last 2 years? Yes. Like, there are so many things that were the trademark of talks the past 2 years of what everyone wanted to talk about. And I don't think you can come back to those 2 points, because I do think this is a much tougher, more physical Ohio State football team. It goes back to just, you got to taste blood and you got to go for it. It's like in a situation like yesterday. I remember when I played, like, you had Mike Vrabel grabbing defensive linemen by the freaking face mask and freaking headbutting them, telling them, go make a play. Like, this is your time to shine. Like, you should have your hand in the ground and be twitching so bad because you want to taste blood and get after those dudes. Like, you just didn't see that. You saw the guys run out on the field. You should have had, I remember Christian Bryant. I remember Ryan Shazier, like Bradley Roby. Like, those dudes would look around and freaking say, throw the ball my way. Let's go. Like, I want this. I'm going to do it. And there's just that I don't even know what to call it. I don't want to call it juice. I don't want to call it swag. It's just that dog mentality that every great team has, that every every great team in big games have. Like, that's why Alabama's been so good in big games, because they have the mentality. That's not a talent. That it doesn't get, when you get into a big game like that and you talk about that dog mentality, throw all talent out the door. I think you and I could both sit here and rattle off comparisons from the last 3 years from Ohio State, Michigan, and how Ohio State's dominated the talent from position group by position group. So this isn't a talent thing. This is a mindset of when you get into these big games and literally, it's a heavyweight fight. What's going to happen? You're not getting that same effect when you play Minnesota, when you play Michigan. I'm even going to argue you're not getting that same thing when you play Penn State, right? Like, you only get those all-out dog fights only a couple games, maybe a couple games a season, if that. And that's always the last game of the year against Team Up North. That would be if you make it into a Big Ten championship game against a big opponent. Michigan's not going to have that next year. When you get into a Final Four game like Georgia last year, it's a freaking dog fight, right? And like, there's only so many games where you need that mentality, but you got to have coaches. You got to have leaders on the team that bring that out in everyone. And that's the one thing we're missing. Do I think some change needs to happen? For sure. 100%. Do I think, so many people are calling for Ryan Day's head? Do I think it's with Ryan? Hell no. Look at Ryan Day's record over the past couple of years. Look at what he's done with this program. Like, tell me who's going to do this same thing with the program that Ryan Day is. This is the hardest program to run in all of America. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a former Ohio State player and we're talking on an Ohio State show. You ask everyone in the entire country, what's probably the hardest job to coach at? It's Ohio State. So tell me who you're going to throw in there to say, oh, it's better. What you can do? Go get, Dabo Swinney. You can get Nick Saban. You can get, people are throwing out. I saw on Twitter, like Dan Lanning. Like, come on. Like, no, those aren't the dudes for this job. Luke Fickell, love Luke. Not ready for the job, right? But I too love Luke Fickell. Just not the right guy. Ryan Day is the guy. he just needs to take it upon himself to make some changes in the offseason at position coaches and get some attitude in these position groups. Because Ryan Day, I understand, he's the CEO of this entire organization. But when you want to talk about players, they take on the persona of their position coach. That's who they spend 95% of their time with. Ryan isn't in all the position group meetings. Ryan isn't on the field in individual drills. Like, the position coaches, in my opinion, sometimes are way more important than the head coach. The head coach has to manage everyone and be able to make correct decisions, right? He's got to manage the game. He's the one doing that. But when it comes to tenacity of players and just putting your hand in the ground and going, by all means, that's the assistant coaches, and that's where I think we're lacking.
Yeah, and I think that that's the conversation that's worth having. You said it right at the start, Zach. I mean, Ohio State is not going to fire Ryan Day. That is not even a conversation. Like, he's going to.
And for everyone who said that should happen, you should get your vote or your fan vote. You should never be a fan of Ohio State because that's asinine.
But he does have to look in the mirror and make some serious, evaluations and assessments of what's happening here, because I think he called it, Zach, after the game. He said, he just feels sick. All right, well, you're the one in charge. You have to find the cure. And he's had opportunities in the last couple of years. Parker Fleming, Ohio State special teams coordinator, was out of contract at the end of last year. Out. He got a new two-year deal with a raise to $500,000. That group had already been struggling, we know, in the game last year and in the Peach Bowl with two face plants that cannot happen. Brings him back, and guess what? You trust him in the game after they don't go for the 4th and 1. A bad punt doesn't get you any real net and field position. Missed field goal. Another illegal procedure for lining up incorrectly on a punt. And they try to take out, I mean, we can maybe debate over this one and the responsibility, communication, whatever. With a minute 5 left, Michigan kicks off. Xavier Johnson catches it at the 4 and returns it to the 19. There was no blocking. There was no decision. They lost 6 yards from a fair catch, and they lost 5 seconds off the clock. Would it have made the difference? I don't know. Probably not. But it could have. And those things added up over the course of the game in field position. That's happened all year, not just against Michigan. So that's a decision that's made in the offseason that penalizes Ryan Day once he gets into the game. The year before, you're talking about Larry Johnson's recruiting struggling. He did land Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau out. They had pretty decent outings. But in the second half of this game, what again happened to the defensive line? They got pushed around and couldn't get off the field. What's going to happen if Jack and JT both go pro? What's really waiting in reserve? All of that lackluster recruiting from Larry Johnson is going to catch up. And his unit didn't actually help decide the game in a positive way for Ohio State on Saturday. Ryan Day is ultimately responsible and develops the quarterbacks. Like, that's why they want to come to Ohio State. Is there a bidding war out there that I'm not aware of for Corey Dennis's services? I mean, those are 3 position groups with the critical interception for Kyle McCord, the gift wrapped Michigan a touchdown early on, the long-term, season-long struggles on special teams with Parker Fleming, and then a broader view for the future of the defensive line group when Larry Johnson, even if he did for like 11 weeks, like show signs of improvement and getting some of his, mojo back with that group, it didn't show up in the game that mattered the most, and the recruiting impact is still lagging behind. So I know this show is supposed to be about you, Zach, but I needed probably to get on this soapbox because those are the decisions that have to be made. They're hard. They're not easy. Ryan Day is a family man, and he doesn't want to put anybody through that torture, but that ruthlessness amongst your coaching staff to push it and get that dog mentality that you're back, that has to include the coaches as well.
Yeah, no, it has to. And that's actually where it starts, right? You can't have Ryan Day can't put all of this on him and say, hey, listen, I've got to make sure, my assistant coaches are getting their players in the right mindset to play a game like this. Those coaches are being paid anywhere from $2 million to $500,000 salaries. Like, they need to put it on themselves to say, hey, listen, my dudes need to make a play when we're called upon in this game, right? And Ryan's got so many other things that he needs to manage throughout a program standpoint. But you're right. It is getting to a point where Ryan is a huge family man, but he needs to make some tough decisions. And I hate to say it, those coaches are forcing him to make those tough decisions. So it's kind of one of those things like, hey, no hard feelings, but the proof is in the pudding, right? Like your performance, especially at a game like Ohio State, gets magnified in games like this, right? If your position group isn't performing all season long and then continues to not perform in the biggest game of the year and the biggest rivalry in all of sports, that's an issue, right? That's a big red flag. Like, hey, Urban Meyer should go thumbs up, thumbs down, right? Like thumbs down on that. Like it's your time to go. Like that's your time to get your team right, to get your position group ready, and you didn't show up. That's it. Like, sorry, that's what you're being graded on. You're not being graded on a 3.5 sack performance against Minnesota. You're not being graded on, a 52-yard field goal against Indiana, right? Like that's not what you're being graded on. You get graded on how your unit performs in the big games. And people I've seen talk to, people want to put on Ryan that he kind of settled for that field goal before the half. Ryan's not making that call from where the ball needs to get before that drive starts. Parker Fleming is saying, hey, get to the ball to the 30-yard line. 30-yard line, we're in go zone, right? Like Parker's spending every single day with the kickers, with the punters, with all those guys are saying, hey, listen, my guy can make it from here. Offense, get the ball to here. So Parker's, right, hey, where do we need to get it to? Parker, 30-yard line. The ball is on the 30-yard line. Guess what? It's on the kicker to make the freaking kick then, right? If he can't make a 52-yarder, Parker shouldn't have said this is where he needs to get, right? There were, 40 seconds left? I guarantee you it's one of those things where if Ryan was told they're not in go zone for a field goal, they would have tried getting some more yards.
Right.
But at some point, that's where the communication happens. And everyone's putting it on Ryan. Like, yes, the heat gets put on Ryan. I get it. I'm not saying no heat should be put on him. But the heat that I'm putting on Ryan should be, you need to make some changes with some coaches that their position groups are not performing, that they are not up to par. They are not at the Ohio State level. That's the bigger issue that we have here.
Yeah, I think that's why, Zach, I feel so puzzled about those decisions, because even if he didn't want to make an in-season coaching change with special teams, like Ryan Day should know by now that he's getting bad information or unreliable execution out of his special teams. And for me, that's like when I'm seeing 4th and 1, even on your own 46, after what's happened the last couple years, if you can't get that yard at that point in the game and you're trusting your punter and your special teams instead of your offense, which has Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka, Cade Stover, Travion Henderson, Chip Trainum, I can keep going down the list. And in between that first interception and the last one, Kyle McCord he played at a pretty high level. I think taking those two out, and I know that they're part of the game. I've already said that the interception early on can't happen, too costly. He was, I think, like 14 for 24 for 250 and the 2 touchdowns. Like that was good enough to win the game. That's certainly going to be good enough to get a 4th and 1 in my mind. And I would think, even if you don't get it, if Ohio State had bet on its offense to execute in that situation and 4th and 2 right before halftime with a timeout in their pocket, I don't think we'd be sitting here saying, even even with hindsight, if they didn't get it, I would have said, well, he trusted his offense more than his special teams. I get that. I've been saying it for 11 weeks. Like, be aggressive, beat Georgia, Ryan Day, and trust your playmakers to get it done. I hand to God, I would have been okay with that if they did not convert in those situations, but they tried aggressively to win the game. And I think that's the other part of this. When I'm talking about Ryan Day making coaching decisions, I'm not shifting the blame to Parker Fleming or Larry Johnson or Corey Dennis or Ohio State's linebacker group or anybody else. This is not to absolve Ryan Day from any of that. His decisions about that helped produce this outcome. But there are also things that he's directly responsible for in the in-game decisions as well that I think have to be adjusted. And I think you and I thought that he had after the Georgia game last year. And like, this was an opportunity that he would go get it. And that didn't happen. There are things that he himself in a game situation has to be better at, because we've seen that happen in this game several times in a row. So none of this, you and I think, are in lockstep. Ryan Day is not going to be fired, and he shouldn't be fired. That doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of things that he's going to have to take better control of so that this doesn't happen again.
I think if you were to ask Ryan at 4:30 yesterday, right? I think if you were to ask Ryan, probably even at halftime of the game yesterday, he would have said they should have went for that 4th and 1, right? In the first quarter. And then there's just an atrocious punt on the play anyways. And it's just no field position change whatsoever. That stuff's on Ryan Day, right? And I know I've kind of pointed blame elsewhere on the show right now. Those, by all means, that's on Ryan, right? That's on managing the football game. How aggressive is your team going to be? That 4th and 1, the 4th and 2 before halftime, right? Listen, correct. I just said you had Parker Fleming's telling him where you need to get it, right? If I'm right, though, and I've seen the way that special teams have performed all year, I know he wants to be the coach to trust his staff, right? Trust the people that he's put in place that they're paying a lot of money for to make these type of decisions. But at some point, as the head coach, you need to put on yourself like, I just don't trust you. Sorry, this is the biggest game of the year. I don't trust you, right? I still have got one timeout left. I think at that point there were like 35 seconds. Let's try and get some more yardage, right? And either, hey, maybe we put in the end zone. Maybe we get a much closer field goal that I feel much more comfortable with. So, yes, I agree with you there. My point that I'm trying to make is those decisions, although massive decisions, did not dictate the outcome of this game, in my opinion. Right now, hey, listen, if they convert on that 4th and 1, right on their second possession and go down and score a touchdown, 7 points, right? I get it. If they get the ball closer right before halftime, kick a field goal, then guess what? At the end of that game, they're going for 3 points instead of 7. I get it, right? Those are big things with the outcome. But at the end of the day, there were things that happened throughout that game where guys did not make plays, where when your name was called upon, you did not step up and rise to the occasion. And that's what I've got more of an issue with than coaching decisions. Because from my standpoint, if you were to say, hey, listen, Ohio State's going to score a touchdown, is going to have momentum, the clock's going to say 8:05 in the 4th quarter, right? And our defense, and we're kicking off. All we got to do is stop this Michigan offense that up to that point hadn't looked all that great, right? JJ McCarthy wasn't really throwing anything on the outside besides some stuff to the tight ends in the middle of the field where they were gashing us on. But running game wasn't anything massive, right? Like we were so much holding them. We just needed to rise to the occasion and say, let's freaking get a stop. The last 2 years are on our minds, right? This entire season, this entire offseason of getting a stop when it's needed is on the line. I would have bet all the money in the world that guess what? Ohio State's going to get off the field. Someone is going to rise to the occasion and make a stop. 8:05 left. The entire season's on the line. Playing the team up north in their house when you've dealt with their shit for the last 800 days or whatever it was. Right now, I guess 3 years, however many, right? Yeah. However it's been, I would have bet anything that those defensive coaches in that moment would have had their guys ready to freaking shine. Ryan Day's not on the field playing defense. Ryan Day's not, playing defense end. Ryan Day's not playing middle linebacker saying, hey, I'm going to make a stop. There are dudes that have to make the stop in that situation, and it didn't happen. Because I can almost guarantee you, if Ohio State gets the ball and makes Michigan punt, Ohio State's driving that ball right down the field and freaking scoring a touchdown. I'm telling you right now, they would have driven the ball down the field and scored a freaking touchdown.
Yeah. I mean, they very nearly did at the end of the game anyway. They get the deep shots down the field. They're in scoring position. If the pass protection holds up for 1/2 second longer and Kyle McCord doesn't get hit, Marvin Harrison Jr. was wide open. I mean, they still nearly won the game anyway. And that's not any solace. That's not a silver lining or anything. I mean, that's just a reality. They still nearly had enough to win this game, which I think is what makes it all the more frustrating, Zach, because if they had another minute and a half to work with after the defense held them to a field goal, which, I mean, you can give them credit for that too if you want, half credit or partial credit. Like the game was within reach, a timeout in a minute. They got to the other side of the field and had an opportunity. If Kyle McCord and Marvin Harrison had 60 more seconds or 1/2 beat of protection more, they still could have won the game. And I think that is what makes it sting even more. All that stuff that they went through and all the things that we're picking on, they still nearly won that game. And like, it doesn't matter. The scoreboard is the scoreboard, and there's no changing the outcome. But I think that also reinforces in my mind that like it wasn't a talent issue. It wasn't that they weren't tough enough. Maybe there are things that have to be changed with the mentality. To your point, I don't think that's wrong. I mentioned this. I think on the notebook. Berm is in the tunnel. He's down there on the field on Saturday, and going up at halftime, he said, I was not there for that. That only one person like was speaking the entire way up the tunnel to the locker room. That doesn't sound like dog mentality or somebody taking hold of a leadership to turn things around. And some of that stuff really only shows up when you're shell shocked. Because before the game, I thought Ohio State looked loose and confident, and like Michigan on the other end of the field during warmups looked really tight and like wasn't moving around and talking much. And then Ohio State got punched in the mouth, and when that blood was there, they didn't seem to like it, but they still almost overcame all that. And that's, I think, the craziest part of looking at this game or making like sweeping evaluations of Ryan Day's tenure based off of it. Like that's probably not the right way of going about it, but I definitely understand the frustration because I watched it and I did not want to be having this conversation today.
Yeah, I think, like you said, if these players and this team truly had that dog mentality, and we're not talking about physicality, we're not talking about toughness, right? Like we've already agreed here, and I think you and I are aligned that this team was much, much tougher, much more physical than the last 2 years in this game, right? I don't think we're talking about that. Now you have to take it a step further. Once you have that physicality and toughness, now you got to incorporate that mindset, right? Of like, hey, listen, I'm going to be put through hell, right? I'm in enemy territory and I am getting all bullets flown at me in every single direction, right? Am I going to sit here and cower, even though I'm tough, right? In enemy territory, holding my ground, or am I going to fight, right? Am I going to push back on them? And that's where I think that's the fine line that this team is struggling to get over, that hump to get over is, they're in the fight. They're tough enough to step in the ring and say, hey, listen, we can hold our own. But at what point do you say, hey, instead of holding my own, I'm going to start throwing haymakers. I'm going to start coming after these dudes and freaking having that mindset and taking it to the next level. Like, Ryan said all week that they were trying to kind of monitor the emotions. Dude, in my opinion, that's one thing that, no, you should have those dudes. I've said it multiple times in the show now, foaming at the mouth, and those coaches should be pouring gasoline on that fire. Right? Like they should be freaking baiting just some freaking junkyard dogs whenever they can to freaking get them even hungrier. Right? Like they should be getting those dudes ready to freaking kill someone. And that's where I think that's where that fine line is that people are struggling with. And I don't think that all comes from Ryan. It goes back to a lot of that's the assistant coaches, right? Like the assistant coaches are with their dudes 100% of the time at the football facility this week. They should have been freaking getting those dudes ready to rock. And I'm not saying they didn't, but when push came to shove in this game, the proof was in the pudding.
And now we all get to eat that pudding for yet another year after Ohio State comes up short 30-24. I know that Zach and I could talk about this for another 3 hours, but we won't. We have a lot more time to break that down. We'll get into what could happen for Ohio State with the college football playoff rankings later on in the week. There's still a path back. I think ESPN on Saturday night somehow still had Ohio State with the 4th best odds of making the playoff. I don't really understand why that is.
Be the bearer of bad news. Last year, I thought there was a true chance Ohio State was getting in. I don't know if that's the case this year. And that's not me being, Debbie Downer on a Sunday after a loss. That's just me realistic that you got some teams in there that have a much clearer path this year than we've seen in years past.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. That's why I was stunned by those numbers, because to me, they don't make sense. And, when you lose that game, you lose control of your destiny. So that's not worth much of our time on a Sunday Blitz, and neither is 3 and Out. So we'll just scrap both of those conversations for now and wrap it up right here with Zach Boren. I'm Austin Ward. This has been Sunday Blitz. Ohio State is a loser in the game 3 years in a row. A lot more fallout and coverage of this game coming your way at the podcast. Thanks for joining us for this one. We'll talk to you later.